The sky above Earth shimmered with an eerie glow as hundreds of massive alien ships descended from the void. They moved in perfect formation, their sleek metallic hulls reflecting the light of the sun like a swarm of deadly insects. Billions of humans watched in stunned silence as the galactic fleet encircled the planet, their intentions clear: domination. The United Earth Defense Forces scrambled to prepare for battle, but no one expected the invaders to strike so swiftly and decisively. On the moon, far from the chaos unfolding on Earth, a small human outpost known as Echo Base stood isolated. It was a modest facility, built into the rocky terrain of the lunar surface, its walls reinforced with layers of steel and concrete. The base was home to fewer than 500 personnel, a mix of soldiers, scientists, and engineers. Despite its size, Echo Base held a critical role in humanity's defense strategy. Its advanced technology and strategic location made it a vital asset in the fight against any potential threat. Commander Ryan Carter stood in the command center of Echo Base, his sharp eyes scanning the monitors that displayed real-time updates from Earth. A tall man with a square jaw and graying hair, Ryan had spent decades in the military, earning a reputation for tactical brilliance. He was calm under pressure, the kind of leader who inspired confidence even in the darkest moments. Now, as he watched the alien fleet surround Earth, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. "Commander," a voice called, out breaking the tense silence. It was Dr. Laura Bennett, a brilliant astrophysicist whose research had drawn the aliens' attention in the first place. She was in her mid-30s, with short brown hair and a determined expression that rarely faltered. "We need to act quickly. If they realize what we're capable of here, they'll target us next." Ryan nodded, his mind already racing through possible scenarios. "Agreed, but we can't make any moves until we know more about them." He turned to face the rest of the team gathered in the room. "Listen up, everyone. This isn't just some random attack. These aliens are organized, and they've got technology far beyond anything we've seen. We need to stay alert and ready for anything." The crew exchanged nervous glances but remained focused. Among them was Sergeant Jake Thompson, a former Marine with a knack for improvisation. Jake was a burly man with a rugged appearance, his face lined with scars from past battles. He had volunteered for duty at Echo Base because he believed in its mission, and now, as the situation grew more dire, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Laura returned to her workstation, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she analyzed data streaming in from Earth. Her heart raced as she pieced together fragments of information about the alien fleet. Their ships emitted a strange energy signature, unlike anything recorded in human databases. It was this energy that had first caught her attention during her research, though she hadn't anticipated it would lead to an invasion. As the hours passed, the tension in the command center grew palpable. The screen showed images of cities burning, skyscrapers crumbling under the relentless assault of alien weapons. The invaders seemed unstoppable, their attacks precise and devastating. Communications between Earth and its lunar bases were beginning to fail, leaving Echo Base increasingly isolated. Ryan paced back and forth, his mind working overtime. He knew they couldn't rely on reinforcements or support from Earth. Not anymore. They were on their own, and the fate of humanity might very well depend on their actions. "Laura," he said suddenly, stopping in front of her station, "what do you think? Can we hold them off if they come for us?" Laura hesitated, her brow furrowing, as she considered the question. "Our shielding is strong, but it wasn't designed for prolonged combat. If they focus all their firepower on us, we won't last long, but—" She trailed off, her eyes lighting up with an idea. "There might be another way." Ryan leaned closer, intrigued. "Go on." "We've been studying their energy signatures," Laura explained. "If we can disrupt their communication systems, it could give us an edge. I've been working on an experimental EMP generator. It might be able to disable their ships temporarily." Ryan straightened, his expression thoughtful. An EMP could level the playing field, at least for a while. But it was risky, and they only had one chance to get it right. "How long will it take to prepare?" he asked. A few hours, maybe less, Laura replied. But we'll need to position it outside the base. The range isn't wide enough to cover all their ships from here. Ryan glanced at Jake, who immediately understood the implication. I'll lead the team, Jake volunteered without hesitation. We'll get it done. Ryan nodded, appreciating Jake's determination. All right, assemble your squad and get ready. In the meantime, we fortify the base. Everyone stays sharp. We don't know when they'll turn their sights on us. The crew sprang into action, each person focused on their tasks. Soldiers checked their weapons and prepared defensive positions around the base. Engineers worked tirelessly to reinforce the shields and ensure the life support systems remained operational. Meanwhile, Laura continued fine-tuning the EMP generator, her mind consumed by calculations and possibilities. Outside the base, the desolate landscape of the moon stretched endlessly, bathed in the cold light of the stars. The alien fleet loomed, ominously in the distance, their ships casting long shadows across the barren terrain. It was a sight that filled everyone with dread, but also resolve. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they refused to surrender. As night fell over Echo Base, Ryan stood by one of the observation windows, gazing out at the alien armada. His thoughts drifted to Earth, to the billions of lives hanging in the balance. He clenched his fists, vowing silently that he would do whatever it took to protect them. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, as a team, as a family. Back in the command center, Laura worked late into the night, her exhaustion masked by sheer determination. She knew the odds were against them, but she also knew they had something the aliens didn't: hope. Hope that they could find a way to fight back, hope that they could survive. And for now, that was enough. The clock ticked onward, each second bringing them closer to the moment of truth. The crew of Echo Base braced themselves, knowing that the battle ahead would test their limits in ways they couldn't imagine. But they were ready, or as ready as they could be. For better or worse, they were humanity's last line of defense. The silence in Echo Base was shattered by a deafening explosion. The ground shook violently, throwing several crew members off their feet. Alarms blared throughout the facility as red warning lights flashed on every wall. The aliens had struck, and they had struck hard. Commander Ryan Carter raced to the command center, his boots pounding against the metal floor. His face was grim as he surveyed the monitors showing the extent of the damage. The alien fleet had launched a surprise attack, targeting not just Earth but also its lunar outposts. Echo Base was under siege, its defensive shields absorbing blow after blow from the invaders' powerful energy weapons. "Report!" Ryan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Laura Bennett looked up from her station, her hands trembling slightly as she typed furiously on the keyboard. "They're using some kind of plasma cannons," she said, her voice calm despite the panic rising around her. "Our shields are holding, for now, but they won't last forever at this rate." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to Sergeant Jake Thompson, who stood nearby with a group of soldiers. "Jake, get your team ready. We might need to hold them off outside if they breach the perimeter." Jake gave a sharp nod and moved quickly to rally his squad. The soldiers checked their weapons one last time before heading toward the airlock that led to the surface. Each of them knew the stakes. If the aliens broke through, it would mean certain death for everyone inside the base. Meanwhile, Laura continued, working on the EMP generator. Her fingers flew over the controls as she adjusted its settings, ensuring it would have the maximum impact when deployed. Time was running out, and the pressure was mounting. She glanced at the clock on the wall, her heart racing. Every second counted. Outside, the alien drones descended like swarms of locusts. Their sleek, insect-like designs glinted ominously in the dim light of the moon. The drones fired relentlessly at the base, their energy blasts striking the reinforced walls and sending shockwaves rippling through the structure. Inside, the crew braced themselves against the tremors, their faces pale but resolute. Ryan moved between stations, issuing orders and offering words of encouragement. "Stay focused," he told the engineers monitoring the shield levels. "We can't afford to lose power now." To the communications officer, he added, "Keep trying to reach Earth Command. Even if it's just a fragment of a signal, we need to know what's happening down there." The comms officer nodded, adjusting his headset as static filled the airwaves. So far, all attempts to contact Earth had failed. The aliens seemed to be jamming transmissions, cutting off any chance of receiving reinforcements or updates. Back, in her lab, Laura felt a surge of frustration as another alarm went off. The EMP generator was almost ready, but positioning it outside the base posed a significant risk. The team tasked with deploying it would be exposed to enemy fire without proper cover. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. There was no room for error. Not now. Jake and his squad suited up in their combat gear, each member checking their equipment one final time. They gathered near the airlock, waiting for Ryan's signal to deploy. Jake's expression was unreadable, though. His eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. He trusted his team, but he knew the odds were stacked heavily against them. "All right, listen up," Jake said, addressing his squad. "This isn't going to be easy, but we've trained for situations like this. Stick together, watch each other's backs, and don't let those bastards get close, understood?" A chorus of affirmatives echoed through the small chamber. The soldiers exchanged determined looks, their camaraderie strengthening their resolve. They weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for everyone back on Earth. As the assault intensified, Ryan made his way to Laura's workstation. "How much longer?" he asked, his tone urgent. 10 minutes, Laura replied, her voice steady despite the tension. "Maybe less if I push it." Ryan nodded. "Jake's team is ready. Once you give the green light, we'll send them out." Laura hesitated, then met his gaze. "Ryan, promise me something." "What is it?" "If anything goes wrong, if the EMP doesn't work, you'll make sure the others evacuate. Don't let them waste their lives trying to save mine." Ryan's expression softened, but only for a moment. "That's not how this works, Laura. We're all in this together. But don't worry, we'll get it done." She managed a weak smile before returning to her task. The countdown began, each passing second feeling like an eternity. Outside, the alien drones continued their relentless assault, their weapons tearing into the base's defenses. The shield levels dropped steadily, inching closer to critical failure. Finally, Laura let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "It's ready," she announced, turning to face Ryan. "The EMP is armed and operational." Ryan wasted no time. "Jake, move out," he shouted into the comm. "Position the device and wait for my signal to activate it." Jake acknowledged the order and led his squad through the airlock. The cold, barren landscape of the moon greeted them, lit only by the faint glow of Earth hanging in the distance. Above them, the alien fleet loomed like a storm cloud, its ships firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. The squad moved cautiously, their movements deliberate and precise. Jake scanned the area constantly, his weapon raised and ready. Behind him, 2 soldiers carried the EMP device, its bulk straining their muscles but unwavering in its importance. They had to place it at a specific location where its effects would ripple outward and disable the largest number of enemy ships. As they approached the designated spot, Jake spotted movement ahead. A group of alien drones hovered nearby, their sensors scanning the terrain. He signaled for his team to take cover behind a cluster of rocks. Holding his breath, he waited until the drones passed before signaling the others to continue. Inside the base, Ryan monitored the squad's progress via surveillance cameras placed strategically around the perimeter. "You're almost there," he said, into the comm. "Just a little farther." Laura watched anxiously from her station, her fingers hovering over the activation controls. She could hear the distant sounds of explosions and gunfire, reminders of the danger Jake and his team faced. Her mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. What if the EMP failed? What if the aliens adapted too quickly? She pushed, the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. Outside, Jake's squad reached the target zone. One of the soldiers set the EMP device down carefully, while another secured it in place. Jake glanced at his teammates, their faces etched with determination. "Good job," he whispered. "Now let's get back to cover." But before they could retreat, a sudden burst of energy illuminated the sky. An alien cruiser had descended, its massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. Its weapons locked onto the squad, and beams of searing light erupted from its cannons. "Take cover!" Jake yelled, diving behind a rock just as the ground erupted in flames. The squad scattered, narrowly avoiding the deadly blasts. Jake gritted, his teeth, his mind racing. They couldn't retreat, not yet, not until the EMP was activated. Back in the command center, Ryan saw the new threat unfold on the monitors. "Laura, we need to activate the EMP now," he said, his voice firm. "But the squad hasn't cleared the blast radius," Laura protested, her voice tinged with panic. "They won't make it if we don't act," Ryan countered. "Trust me, Laura." She hesitated, her hands hovering over the controls. Finally, with a deep breath, she pressed the activation button. A low hum filled the air as the EMP charged, building toward its inevitable release. On the surface, Jake noticed the change in the atmosphere. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and the alien cruiser's weapons faltered momentarily. "Get down!" he shouted, knowing what was about to happen. A blinding flash of light erupted from the EMP device, spreading outward in a wave of electromagnetic energy. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The hum of machinery, the roar of engines, even the crackle of energy weapons ceased entirely. When the light faded, the alien cruiser floated motionless in space, its systems completely disabled. Jake exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. "We did it," he muttered, helping his teammates to their feet. "Let's get back inside." Inside Echo Base, cheers erupted as the crew realized they had succeeded. The alien fleet was immobilized, their ships rendered powerless. Laura slumped into her chair, tears of exhaustion and triumph streaming down her face. Ryan allowed himself a rare smile, though he knew the fight was far from over. "We bought ourselves some time," Ryan said, addressing the crew. "But they'll adapt. Stay vigilant." For now, however, they had won a crucial victory, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And as the survivors of Echo Base regrouped, they knew they had proven something vital. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still find a way to fight back. The aftermath of the EMP blast left Echo Base in a strange state of calm. The alien fleet hung motionless in space, their once menacing ships now silent and dark. Inside the base, the crew exchanged weary but triumphant glances. They had done the impossible. They had struck back against an enemy that seemed invincible. But the victory was short-lived, and everyone knew it. Commander Ryan Carter stood in the command center, his eyes scanning the monitors displaying the disabled alien fleet. He didn't allow himself to relax, not even for a moment. "This isn't over," he said firmly, breaking the brief silence. "Their ships may be down, but they're not gone. We need to act fast while we still have the advantage." Laura Bennett nodded in agreement. She was seated at her workstation, her fingers already flying over the keyboard, as she analyzed the effects of the EMP. Her expression was focused, her mind racing through possibilities. "You're right," she said without looking up. "The pulse disrupted their systems, but it's only temporary. They'll find a way to reboot or adapt. We need to hit them hard before they recover." Ryan turned to Sergeant Jake Thompson, who had just returned from the surface with his squad. The soldiers looked exhausted, their uniforms covered in dust and scorch marks, but their spirits were high. "Jake," Ryan said, his voice steady, "we need to press our advantage. Can your team handle another mission?" Jake straightened, his broad shoulders squared despite his fatigue. "We're ready," he replied without hesitation. "What's the plan?" Ryan gestured to one of the screens showing the alien ships. "We've got scavenged materials from old drones and damaged equipment. If we rig explosives to them and send them toward the nearest alien vessels, we can take out some of their ships permanently. It'll weaken their numbers and buy us more time." Jake nodded, understanding the strategy immediately. "It's risky, but it could work. How many do you want us to prep?" "As many as we can spare," Ryan answered. "Focus on the closest ships. Once they're rigged, we'll launch them remotely and detonate when they're close enough." Laura chimed in, her tone urgent. "We don't have much time. Their systems are already starting to reboot. Some of their smaller drones are regaining functionality. We need to move now. Ryan gave the order, and the crew sprang into action. Engineers and technicians worked tirelessly to retrofit the scavenged drones with explosives. Each drone was carefully armed and programmed to fly toward the alien fleet. Meanwhile, Jake and his squad prepared to escort the drones outside, ensuring they reached their targets safely. As the preparations continued, tension filled the air. The crew knew this was a desperate gamble, but they also knew it was their best chance to turn the tide. Laura stayed glued to her station, monitoring the status of the alien ships and coordinating with the engineers. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she pushed forward, determined to see the mission through. Finally, the drones were ready. Ryan gathered the team in the command center for a final briefing. "This is it," he said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "Once these drones reach their targets, we detonate. If everything goes according to plan, we'll destroy several of their ships and force them to rethink their strategy. But if something goes wrong, we need to be ready to defend ourselves. Everyone knows their role. Stick to it, and we'll get through this." The team nodded, their expressions resolute. Jake led his squad back to the airlock where the drones awaited deployment. As they suited up, Ryan approached him. "Be careful out there," he said, his tone softer than usual. "We can't afford to lose you." Jake gave a small smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Don't worry, Commander, we'll get it done." Outside, the lunar surface was eerily quiet. The alien drones that had been attacking earlier were now grounded, their systems still offline. Jake's team moved quickly, guiding the explosive-laden drones toward the immobilized alien ships. The massive vessels loomed above them, their sleek designs casting long shadows across the barren terrain. As they neared the first target, Jake signaled for his team to hold position. "Let's make sure these things are locked on," he said, his voice low but firm. One of the soldiers checked the drone's programming, confirming they were set to home in on the nearest alien ship. "Good to go," the soldier reported, stepping back. "They're ready to launch." Jake nodded and activated the drones remotely. With a soft hum, the machines lifted off the ground, their propellers spinning as they accelerated toward the alien fleet. Jake watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. "Now we wait," he muttered, gripping his weapon tightly. Inside the base, Laura monitored the drone's progress on her screen. "They're closing in," she announced, her voice tense. "Prepare for detonation." Ryan stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the monitor. "Do it," he ordered. Laura pressed the activation button and a series of explosions lit up the darkness. The drones slammed into the alien ships, their payloads detonating with devastating force. Massive chunks of debris tumbled through space as several alien vessels were obliterated. Cheers erupted in the command center as the crew celebrated the destruction of their enemies. But the celebration was short-lived. On the monitors, Laura noticed something alarming. "Commander," she said, her voice sharp with concern. "Some of the other ships are starting to reactivate. Their systems are coming back online faster than we anticipated." Ryan's jaw tightened. "How long until they're fully operational?" "Minutes," Laura replied. "Maybe less." Ryan turned to the communications officer. "Send out a message to Earth Command. Tell them what we've done and warn them about the remaining ships. Even if they can't respond, someone might pick up the signal." The comms officer nodded and began broadcasting the message, hoping against hope that someone on Earth would hear it. Meanwhile, Jake and his squad hurried back toward the base. The alien drones that had been grounded earlier were beginning to stir, their weapons powering up once again. "Move," Jake shouted, urging his team to pick up the pace. Back inside, Ryan ordered the crew to prepare for another assault. "They're not going to sit back and let us win," he said grimly. "Get to your stations and brace for impact." The aliens wasted no time. As soon as their systems came back online, they launched a renewed attack on Echo Base. The shields, already weakened from the earlier assault, struggled to hold under the barrage of energy blasts. Explosions rocked the facility, sending debris flying and forcing the crew to take cover. Laura huddled behind her workstation, clutching her helmet as the lights flickered overhead. She glanced at the monitors, her mind racing. "We need to disable their targeting systems," she said urgently. "If we can blind them, we might stand a chance." Ryan nodded. "Can you do it?" "It's risky," Laura admitted. "But I think I can reroute power from the shields to create a localized jamming field. It won't last long, but it might give us enough time to regroup." "Do it," Ryan ordered. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Laura got to work, her fingers flying over the controls as she redirected energy from the base's defenses. Outside, the alien drones circled the base, their weapons firing relentlessly. The crew fought back, their determination unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. Finally, Laura completed the jamming field. A burst of static interference spread outward, disrupting the aliens' targeting systems. For a brief moment, the attack ceased, giving the crew a much-needed reprieve. Ryan seized the opportunity. "Repair teams, get to work on the shields. Everyone else stay alert. This isn't over yet." As the crew scrambled to repair the damage, Jake and his squad returned to the base, battered but alive. "We made it," Jake said, breathing heavily as he removed his helmet. "But they're adapting faster than we thought." Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "We'll figure it out. Together." Despite the chaos and destruction, a sense of unity permeated the base. The crew of Echo Base had faced unimaginable odds, and they had refused to give up. They were battered, bruised, and far from safe, but they had proven one thing beyond a doubt. Humanity's spirit was unbreakable. And as long as they stood together, they would keep fighting, for themselves, for Earth, and for the future of their species. The jamming field created by Laura's quick thinking gave Echo Base a brief but crucial window of opportunity. The alien drones, their targeting systems disrupted, circled aimlessly above the lunar surface. Inside the base, the crew worked frantically to repair the damaged shields and fortify their defenses. It was a race against time, and everyone knew it. Commander Ryan Carter moved from station to station, checking on the progress of his team. His face was streaked with dust, and exhaustion was etched into every line of his body, but his voice remained steady and commanding. "How much longer until the shields are back online?" he asked one of the engineers. The engineer glanced up from his work, sweat dripping down his face. "Another 10 minutes, maybe less," he replied. "But we're pushing the system to its limits. If they hit us again before then, we're in trouble." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to Sergeant Jake Thompson, who stood nearby with his squad. "Jake, I need your team ready to hold the perimeter if the aliens breach the base. We can't afford to lose ground now." Jake gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Commander, we'll be ready." Laura Bennett stayed glued to her workstation, monitoring the status of the jamming field. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she adjusted the settings, trying to extend its range and duration. She knew it wouldn't last forever. The aliens were intelligent, and they would find a way to counteract it soon enough. Every second counted. Outside, the alien fleet began to stir. The larger ships that had survived the EMP blast and the subsequent drone attacks were slowly regaining functionality. Their massive forms loomed ominously in the void of space, their weapons powering up as their systems rebooted. On the monitors, inside Echo Base, Laura watched the energy reading spike, her heart sinking. "Commander," she called out, her voice urgent. "Their main ships are coming back online. They've figured out how to bypass the jamming field." Ryan turned to face her, his expression grim. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Laura replied. "Maybe less." Ryan clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had dealt significant damage to the alien fleet, but it wasn't enough. The invaders still outnumbered them, and their technology far surpassed anything humanity possessed. He glanced at the exhausted faces of his crew, their determination unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. They couldn't give up. Not now. "Laura," Ryan said, his voice firm, "is there any way to extend the jamming field? Even for a few more seconds?" Laura hesitated, her brow furrowing as she considered the question. Extending the field would require diverting even more power from the shields, leaving the base vulnerable, but they didn't have a choice. "I can try," she said finally, "but it'll leave us exposed." "Do it," Ryan ordered. "We'll hold them off." Laura nodded and got to work, her fingers moving rapidly over the controls. She rerouted additional power from the shields to the jamming field, praying it would buy them enough time. Outside, the alien drones began to regain their coordination, their movements becoming more precise as they closed in on the base. Jake and his squad prepared for the worst. They stationed themselves near the airlock, weapons ready, their expressions grim but resolute. "Stay sharp," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "They're coming." As the jamming field began to weaken, the aliens launched another assault. Energy blasts struck the base with renewed ferocity, shaking the structure to its core. The crew braced themselves, holding on to whatever they could as the explosions rocked the facility. Despite the chaos, they continued their tasks, determined to keep the base operational. Finally, the shields flickered back to life, their protective barrier reactivating just in time to absorb the brunt of the attack. A collective sigh of relief swept through the command center, but Ryan knew they weren't out of danger yet. "Good work," he said to the engineers, his tone approving but urgent. "Now reinforce the weak points. We can't afford another breach." Laura slumped back in her chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had pushed herself to her limits, but she refused to stop. "The jamming field is gone," she reported. "They'll target us directly now." Ryan nodded. "Then we'll fight back. Communications officer, send another message to Earth Command. Let them know what we've done and warn them about the remaining ships. Use every frequency available." The communications officer nodded and began broadcasting the message, hoping anyone on Earth would hear it. Meanwhile, Ryan turned his attention to the monitors showing the alien fleet. Several of their ships had been destroyed, but dozens remained, their weapons trained on Echo Base. "We need to take out their command ship," Ryan said suddenly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the screen. "If we can disable their flagship, it might disrupt their entire operation." Laura looked up, her expression skeptical. "That's suicide," she said bluntly. "Their flagship is heavily armored. We don't have the firepower to take it down." Ryan shook his head. "Not directly, but we might be able to use their own weapons against them." He turned to Jake. "Gather your best pilots. We're going to launch a counterattack." Jake raised an eyebrow. "A counterattack with what? We don't have any fighters left." Ryan gestured to the monitors. "They're smaller drones. We can retrofit them with explosives just like before. If we can get close enough to their flagship, we can detonate them and cause serious damage." Jake nodded slowly, understanding the plan. "It's risky, but it could work. I'll assemble the team." As Jake and his squad prepared for the mission, Laura worked tirelessly to modify the remaining drones. She armed them with explosives and programmed them to follow specific flight paths, ensuring they would reach the alien flagship. Her hands trembled with fatigue, but she refused to slow down. Every second counted. Finally, the drones were ready. Jake led his team to the airlock where the modified machines awaited deployment. They suited up quickly, their movements deliberate and focused. "This is it," Jake said, his voice steady. "Once we're out there, stick to the plan. Don't deviate, no matter what happens." The team nodded, their expressions resolute. They stepped outside, the cold, barren landscape of the moon stretching endlessly around them. Above them, the alien fleet loomed like a storm cloud, its ships firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. Jake activated the drones remotely, sending them hurtling toward the alien flagship. The machines moved swiftly, their propellers spinning as they accelerated through the void. Jake and his team followed at a safe distance, providing cover fire as they advanced. Inside the base, Ryan and Laura monitored the drone's progress on the monitors. "They're closing in," Laura said, her voice tense. "Prepare for detonation." Ryan nodded. "Do it." Laura pressed the activation button, and a series of explosions lit up the darkness. The drones slammed into the alien flagship, their payloads detonating with devastating force. Massive chunks of debris tumbled through space as the flagship's hull buckled under the impact. Cheers erupted in the command center as the crew celebrated the destruction of the enemy's command ship, but the victory was short-lived. On the monitors, Laura noticed something alarming. "Commander," she said, her voice sharp with concern. "The other ships are changing formation. They're preparing for a coordinated attack." Ryan's jaw tightened. "How long until they strike?" "Minutes," Laura replied, "maybe less." Ryan turned to the communications officer. "Send out one last message to Earth Command. Tell them to mobilize whatever forces they have left. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The comms officer nodded and began broadcasting the message, hoping against hope that someone on Earth would hear it. Meanwhile, Ryan ordered the crew to prepare for the final assault. "This is it," he said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "We've fought harder than anyone could have imagined. Now we hold the line. For Earth, for humanity, and for the future." Outside, Jake and his squad hurried back toward the base, their weapons blazing as they fought off the remaining alien drones. The battle was fierce, but they refused to falter. They had come too far to give up now. Back inside, the crew braced themselves for the inevitable attack. The shields held steady, absorbing blow after blow from the alien fleet. Explosions rocked the facility, sending debris flying and forcing the defenders to take cover. Despite the mounting pressure, Ryan refused to retreat. "Hold your positions," he shouted over the comm. "We're not done yet." As the battle raged on, a sense of unity permeated the base. The crew of Echo Base had faced unimaginable odds, and they had refused to give up. They were battered, bruised, and far from safe, but they had proven one thing beyond a doubt. Humanity's spirit was unbreakable, and as long as they stood together, they would keep fighting, for themselves, for Earth, and for the future of their species. The final assault came with a fury that shook Echo Base to its core. The alien fleet, now operating without their flagship, launched a coordinated attack that seemed more desperate than strategic. Their weapons pounded the base's shields relentlessly, each blast threatening to shatter the fragile barrier protecting the crew. Inside, the walls groaned under the strain, and sparks flew from overloaded circuits. Yet, despite the chaos, the crew of Echo Base held their ground. Commander Ryan Carter stood in the command center, his eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the battle outside. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his voice remained steady as he issued orders. "Engineers, focus on the shield generators," he said, his tone firm. "We can't afford another breach." The engineers worked tirelessly, their hands moving quickly over the controls as they rerouted power and patched damaged systems. One of them called out, "Shields are at 30%, Commander. If they keep this up, we won't last much longer." Ryan clenched his fist but forced himself to stay calm. "Do what you can," he replied. "Every second counts." Nearby, Dr. Laura Bennett monitored the status of the alien fleet. Her fingers trembled as she typed, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities. She had already pushed herself to her limits, but she refused to stop. "Their ships are regrouping," she announced, her voice tight with urgency. "They're preparing for one last push." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. He turned to Sergeant Jake Thompson, who stood nearby with his squad. "Jake, I need your team ready to hold the perimeter if they breach the base." "We can't let them inside." Jake gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Commander, we'll be ready." As the aliens intensified their assault, the crew braced themselves for the worst. Explosions rocked the facility, sending shockwaves through the structure. Debris rained down from the ceiling, forcing the defenders to take cover. Despite the mounting pressure, no one faltered. Each member of the crew knew the stakes. If they failed, humanity would fall. Finally, a deafening explosion shook the base, causing the lights to flicker and die. For a brief moment, darkness enveloped the command center. Then emergency lighting kicked in, casting a dim glow over the room. The crew exchanged worried glances, but they didn't panic. They had trained for situations like this, and they trusted their leader to guide them through. "Status report," Ryan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. One of the engineers raised his hand. "Shields are down to 15%, Commander. Another direct hit and we're done." Laura stepped forward, her expression grim. Their main weapon is charging. If it fires, it'll take out the entire base. Ryan's mind raced. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had found a way to survive. He glanced at the monitors, searching for any advantage they could exploit. Then, an idea struck him. "Laura," he said, turning to her, "can we overload the reactor? Create an EMP burst, powerful enough to disable their fleet?" Laura hesitated, her eyes widening as she considered the implications. Overloading the reactor would destroy Echo Base, but it might also save Earth. "It's possible," she said finally. "But it'll take time to set up, and we'll have to evacuate everyone first." Ryan nodded. "Do it. Start evacuating the non-essential personnel immediately. Jake, get your team ready to escort them to the escape pods." Jake saluted and moved quickly to carry out the order. He gathered his squad and began directing the crew toward the airlocks, where the escape pods awaited. The evacuation proceeded, swiftly but calmly, each person knowing their role and trusting their leader to see them through. Meanwhile, Laura worked furiously to prepare the reactor for overload. Her hands flew over the controls as she rerouted power and adjusted settings, ensuring the EMP would have the maximum impact. Sweat dripped down her face, but she didn't slow down. Every second counted. As the evacuation continued, Ryan stayed behind in the command center, monitoring the situation. On the monitors, he watched as the alien fleet prepared to fire their main weapon. "Laura," he said into the comm. "How much longer?" 2 minutes, she replied, her voice strained but determined. "Maybe less." Ryan clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold them off," he muttered under his breath. "Just a little longer." Outside, Jake and his squad fought fiercely to protect the escape pods. Alien drones swarmed around them, their weapons firing relentlessly. The soldiers returned fire, their movements precise and coordinated. "Keep moving," Jake shouted, urging the remaining crew members toward safety. "We're almost there." Back in the command center, Ryan gave the order to activate the reactor. Overload. "Laura, do it now," he said, his voice firm. Laura pressed the activation button, her hands trembling as she completed the sequence. A low hum filled the air as the reactor began to build energy, its power growing with each passing second. "It's done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to go." Ryan nodded and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the airlock. They joined the last group of evacuees, their faces etched with determination as they boarded the final escape pod. As the pod launched, the reactor reached critical mass. A blinding flash of light erupted from Echo Base, spreading outward in a massive wave of electromagnetic energy. The alien fleet was engulfed, their ships disabled as their systems shut down completely. The EMP pulse rippled through space, leaving the invaders powerless and adrift. Inside the escape pod, the crew watched silently as the light faded, revealing the aftermath of the explosion. Echo Base was gone, reduced to a smoldering crater on the lunar surface. But the alien fleet floated motionless in space, their threat neutralized. For now, Ryan stood at the front of the pod, his expression somber but resolute. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion. "We held them off." Laura sat nearby, her body trembling with exhaustion. Tears streamed down her face as she gazed at the remains of the base. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ryan knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We made a choice," he said gently. "And we saved Earth. That's what matters." As the escape pod drifted toward Earth, the crew reflected on everything they had sacrificed. They had lost their home, their comrades, and nearly their lives. But they had proven something vital, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still find a way to fight back. On Earth, the remnants of humanity began to rally. Inspired by the bravery of Echo Base, resistance groups organized coordinated strikes against the weakened alien forces. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The invaders, now vulnerable and disoriented, found themselves facing a planet, united in defiance. Days later, Ryan and Laura stood together on the observation deck of a makeshift command center on Earth. The scarred but beautiful blue planet stretched out before them, a testament to humanity's resilience. Ryan placed a hand on the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've got a long road ahead of us," he said, his voice steady, "but we'll rebuild, together." Laura nodded, her expression softening. "Yeah," she said, a small smile forming on her lips. "Together." For now, the battle was over. The crew of Echo Base had given everything to protect humanity, and their sacrifice had not been in vain. As the sun rose over a new dawn for Earth, the survivors knew they had proven one thing beyond a doubt: hope could prevail, even in the darkest of times. And as long as humanity stood united, they would never give up. Not ever.